Big Game, Chapter 6 by Tim Green. Coach Kynan spun around in the kitchen chair and spilled his coffee when he saw Danny advancing toward him. He was up on his feet and his voice was low. "Danny, what are you doing?" Danny stopped short, breathing heavy. The wrench suddenly felt like a 50-pound weight in his hand and he lowered it to his leg. "I was, fixing the mower." "We missed you at practice this morning." Coach removed his cap and scratched at the balding top of his head. Where it wasn't covered by bristly black hair, Coach Kynan's skin was deeply tanned. Danny's mom walked into the kitchen. "Danny, I was just telling Coach that you didn't even mention football practice." She stopped when she saw the coffee stains across the front of Coach's purple Crooked Creek football shirt. "What happened here?" she demanded, looking at Danny. "Nothing to worry about, Sharon," the coach said smoothly. "And I'm not mad at all, Danny. If you need some extra time after everything," Coach Kynan put the hat back on his head. "Well, we all get that. It's just that you have to get your 10 practices in before the first game. We open against Froston, and I know you won't want to miss that." Danny looked at his feet, embarrassed. "Okay, kiddo. We got our second session at 5 today, and tomorrow morning we go at 7:30. Coach Kynan patted Danny's shoulder and reached for the door. Danny saw him motion to Danny's mom before slipping outside. "I'll walk Coach to his truck," she said. Danny washed up and made himself lunch. He was sitting at the table halfway through the sandwich and a glass of milk when his mom returned and sat down beside him. She reached over and took his free hand in hers. "Danny, Coach Kynan says he has something he thinks you might like to talk to someone at the junior high." "About what?" She waved a hand in the air before she asked, "Do you want to go to practice this afternoon?" Danny shook his head and looked away. "I don't know," he mumbled. "Coach said take this first day off." She nodded and picked up the coach's coffee cup, wiping where it had spilled. "Then start fresh tomorrow, right?" Danny took another bite and chewed, licking a spot of ketchup from his lip. "I don't know." "You don't know? You don't know what?" Danny shrugged and stuffed the rest of his sandwich into his mouth. He got up and finished chewing on his way to the sink, where he drank down the last of his milk before rinsing the glass and his plate and heading for the door. "Danny?" He stopped. "Yes?" He held the door halfway open, but he was already out. "Your father wanted you to play." Danny winked and shut his eyes, squeezing back the tears. He turned and slammed the door and ran into the garage. He was breathing hard and forced himself to count backward from 100 by fives. He started up the mower, still counting, and set off down the driveway. Before he hit the road, he pulled on his headphones and turned up the playlist so that the sound was deafening. The vibration of the machine beneath his hands on the wheel was somehow shooting. He was breathing normal again. Without planning it, he stopped at Janny's house and rang the bell. Janny kept her long blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was nearly just as tall as Danny, with big brown eyes flocked with gold. Seeing her approach, Danny started to relax. He told her what happened, and she nodded like she understood but got right to the point. "People probably would make less of a fuss if you didn't quit football." "I didn't quit. I just didn't start." She looked at him and shrugged. "You know I don't care if you play. I'm just trying to help. Your mom's in a state. Cupcake called me and told me everyone's talking about Daniel Owen's son quitting football. Maybe everyone should mind their business." "That'll be the day," she said. Won't ever happen in this small town." "Come on," Danny said. He climbed onto the John Deere and motioned his head for her to climb aboard. She nodded and sat facing the other way with her feet braced on the fenders. As he started the engine, he could feel the back of her head against his own and her shoulder blades cutting into his back. He liked the way that felt, rumbling down the shoulder of Route 222. All too soon they came to the break in the guardrail before the bridge. Danny pulled over further onto the grass and cut the motor. He followed Janny down the bank and across the creek, finding footholds and rocks as familiar as his front steps. They climbed the fair bank, grabbing a root halfway up that was worn smooth from acting as a handrail. They followed their own winding dirt path back to where the creek bowed, and there were several small drops. They weren't waterfalls, but over thousands of years the drop had created small slides of water, sluices that swirled into hollowed-out bathtubs of rock. There were 3 rocks, one for each of them. inside of their tree fort. Cupcake's was the biggest, twice as wide as Danny's, and Cupcake filled every inch of it. Jenny stood beside it and chuckled. Cupcake, I love that name. I love how he got it. Almost everyone in Cuckoo Creek knew that story. Cupcake's real name was Eugene Wills. They were in 3rd grade and just started Pop Warner football. When Coach Hitchcock, a former Marine, saw Eugene unsuccessfully try to defend himself against a blocker half his size, he went wild. The coach stood over Eugene, who pawed the air like a turtle on its back. I never seen a cupcake big as you in my entire life, Coach Hitchcock hollered so that everyone, including Danny's father and the other parents in the bleachers, heard him. You gotta learn to hit someone, son, or you're never gonna be able to play this game. Back then, Eugene was a big blob of dough, and the name caught hold. The next day in school, many of the kids jeered and called him Cupcake. The next night in practice, Eugene went berserk. Blubbery but intense, he steamrolled anyone who got in his way and then stood over their fallen bodies, red-faced and screaming, "That's right, I'm a cupcake. How's it feel to be crushed by a cupcake?" Danny and Eugene had been friends even back then, and Danny was one of the few people who hadn't called him Cupcake. After Eugene had pummeled their quarterback, he bent down over the small player's crumpled face. "That's a cupcake for you. How do you like that, Cupcake?" Danny had tried to calm his friend, and he pulled him aside. "They're only kidding you, Eugene. Maybe lighten up." His friend had turned to him with blazing eyes. "Don't call me Eugene. I'm Cupcake. Call me Cupcake." Danny grinned, remembering how the legend was born. "Come on," Jenny said. "Let's go swimming." Jenny stripped off her t-shirt and shorts, revealing... The video accidentally stopped again, like last time. So, "Come on," Jenny said. "Let's go swimming." Jenny stripped off her t-shirt and shorts, revealing a yellow bikini. She slid down into her own tub, the narrowest of the 3, and she laid her head back in the sluice so a fountain sprang up around her ponytail. The water's nice and cool from the rain. Then he stripped down to his boxers and lowered himself into his tub. The rock walls were smooth and soft with pale green algae. The water bubbled and swirled with the sticky heat of the day, was washed clean along with the grass clippings stuck to his legs. Danny sighed and raised his voice above the babble of the water. "I could stay here forever," Danny giggled. "Me too." After a time, he slid all the way down, slipping beneath the surface of the pool. Aside from the rush of swirling water, it was completely silent and dark. He turned thoughts over in his mind like smooth stones. He might have been the only person in the world, or an unborn baby in his mother's stomach, or on the other end of the journey, not the beginning, but the end. His dad had reached the end. The sudden image of his father staring at him shocked Danny and plunged a dagger of pain into his heart. Paralyzed by the memory, he just hung there, his arms and head suspended in the water until he convulsed and exploded from the pool, gasping for air. "Hey!" Jenny shouted. She was standing in the middle of her tub, the water racing around her. "You scared me. What were you doing under there? Hey! Where are you going?" Danny waded through the water until he reached the bank. He pulled on his clothes as he sucked air into his lungs. "I gotta get back home and get some dinner and get some sleep." "Why?" Jenny asked as she sloshed across the creek. "What happened?" Danny pulled a sweaty, grass-stained t-shirt over his head and grinned at her. "I got football tomorrow," she smiled. "That's great, Danny." "Yeah, my dad wants me to, he would want me to." He looked down to concrete, untying his sneaker. He sniffed and tied the other one, sensing Jenny's presence right next to him. He stood and looked into her deep brown eyes. She parted her lips, maybe to say something, but he was afraid she might try to kiss him, or that he might try to kiss her, and that scared him silent. He looked away to catch his breath before setting his mouth in a flat line and giving her a hardened look. "I'm going to do this for him," he said. "I'm dedicated this season to my dad." That's the end of chapter 6.